Okay, folks, welcome back. This is going to be an optional exercise, so you don't have to do this one, but it's pretty useful if you have the time to do it. It will take about 30 minutes. So what we're going to do here is stack rank the how might we sections, and we might even break them down a little bit into items that are a bit more digestible, and which we'll run through now in the next couple of minutes. Before starting this exercise, it's always useful to just go back to reaffirm the purpose of this sprint. So we just want to read through our goal again with the team. So our goal for this pretend travel bucket sprint is to create a sustainable travel company that enables users to discover, remember, and visit the places of their dreams. So take a second now to go back to your goal and read it aloud with your team, just to make sure that you're all still focused on it and still aligned. Feel free to make changes to that goal if necessary. Okay, so once we're back now at our how might we section, the purpose of stack ranking here is to try to get a consensus across the team about what is most important to perfect early on with your product. Goal here is really to create alignment across the team. Now it's a fairly free form approach. The reason that alignment is so important early on is because if you're making an MVP, a minimal viable product, or a first iteration of a product build, you're not going to be able to include everything that you want to include in the final product. It's just not realistic in terms of time and resources. So you have to be a bit selective. You have to pick out the things that are most important to work on those first. And then gradually, as you release the app or your product, you can add extra bits in that touch on the other parts that you feel are important. So this is just a prioritization tool to figure out what are the absolutely critical things we need for a minimal viable product. In your Miro board here, I'm going to get you to create 3 sticky notes. The first one can be red, and this is called basics. For the next one, let's use blue. So we create a blue sticky here, and this is called performance. And for our final sticky, let's use a green, and this is called delighters. What do these 3 stickies mean? Well, basics are the essential things that you need to be in your first version of your product. These are things that it simply won't work without having. Performance is anything to do with, say, scaling your product or improving the speed and efficiency of your product or the delivery of your product. That's everything to do with the performance. And delighters are essentially small things. They're not essential. They're not to do with performance, but they maybe give a really nice user interaction or a really nice user experience, or there's one kind of little feature that makes a user really think, wow, that was really enjoyable to use or really fun to use, or I really, really love that feature. So it's not core functionality. It's not essential to the success of the product, but it gives that user a little bit of happiness, a little bit of joy when they use it. So what we're going to do now is break down our how might we headings, which we can see over here, and try to grade these as whether they relate to basic, performance, or delighters. You can copy these over if you want to keep them there for continuity. So you can just duplicate those or copy and paste them over here so that we can rearrange them. Now you'll notice once you have them organized over here, you'll notice that some of these aren't really that helpful for our purposes here. For example, miscellaneous is a bit too broad. Virality and sales could maybe be split out into 2. Utility for users is a bit vague. So what we want to do here is just as a team have an open discussion. We can use these how might we headings, or we can add in other things that we thought that our experts mentioned or brought up, or things that we feel are important here. So we want to flesh these out and create a couple more. Okay, so again, using our travel bucket example, this fictitious travel company, we broke out those how might we's into things that are a little bit more usable, a little bit more descriptive, and a little bit more detailed. And these, as I said, could be things that an expert mentioned or that the team feels are important. So just to show you in this sample what those might be. There might be usefulness to influencers, profitability, user experience or UX, UI, which is user interface, utility for users, usefulness for influencers, last minute deals, virality might be one, utility for users in terms of discovering places, and utility for users in terms of being reminded of places, and scalability. These might be our areas that we want to try to include, that we're going to try to rank so that we can see which are the most important here. But before we get to ranking, what we want to do is just break these up into our basics, performers, or delighters. So let's start here with scalability. This is quite clearly a performer. It's very much related to performance. So we just want to change that color card to blue. So to do that, you just click on it, click your little color icon here, and just make it match with your performance. And I think virality could be said to be a performance thing as well. So that's how easy it is for the product to get picked up online and spread quickly. We might have profitability as a basic, because it is a business, so we obviously need it to be profitable at some point. So let's move that to there. And as an example of a delighter, a really nice user experience might be a delighter. It's not absolutely essential, but it definitely helps and will leave users with that kind of warm, fuzzy feeling that you get once you've used a really, really high quality product. So take a couple of minutes now as a team to try to break your how might we titles or your sections here of what you think are most important. Try to break them up into basics, performance, and delighters. Again, this is just an open conversation. Feel free to start dragging things around and let people chip in when they have something to share. And take a couple of minutes to move each of those stickies into their relevant section. Okay, so this is what we have for our travel bucket. So hopefully you have something that's starting to look a bit similar. We've got our basics here on the left, which are profitability, usefulness for influencers, and utility for users. So at this point, our travel bucket team has decided that targeting influencers, after speaking to a couple of them in our expert interview sessions, we've decided that they are the key to this whole process. If we can get influencers on board, they will promote it to their followers. So that kind of brings in your virality of performance. Once we have influencers with a big following, we will get users. And once we have users, we'll be able to bring in some profitability by doing some deals with ad agencies and restaurants or local attractions or whatever it might be to generate our revenue. So we kind of feel like the team that if we can get users and influencers in particular, the rest will sort itself out in future. We can turn that into profit in the coming months or years. In terms of our performance, we've got scalability and virality. And in terms of our delighters, we've got last minute deals, user experience, user interface, and utility for users to be reminded of places. So we're kind of taking the discovery of places as the critical part. That's an essential piece of core functionality, and then being reminded of those places is an optional extra, I guess. So next, what we want to do is just create a title over here. So you can use this text heading. So we want to put most important, and we can a little bit bigger. Let's make it 80. So we've got our most important. Now we want to put in our least important. And then we might just add a line here as well, just that we can see that it's kind of on some scale. Okay. So now what we're going to do as a group, as a team, again, is just have a very open conversation. We're going to start pulling our different sticky notes here across, and we're going to try to rank them in terms of what's most important. So as an example, for our travel bucket app, we might feel that usefulness to influencers, as I mentioned there, we are starting to think that that's going to be the key to this whole endeavor. So that is absolutely critical for us. We need to make something that's useful for influencers. That in turn will bring some virality. So that could be our next kind of most important aspect, which in turn will bring profitability. So again, that might be how we start to rank some of these. However, somebody else might say, actually, you know what? Profitability for right now because remember, we're thinking about our minimum viable product, about our first iteration, our MVP. So right now, profitability actually isn't that important. What's more important is virality, because if we can get users, down the line we'll be able to monetize that and to create some profit. So actually we might move profitability down here somewhere. It's not that important for our MVP. So remember, this isn't what's most important for the end product, the product in 5 years' time. This is what's most important to build right now. So we might put in a delighter then that it's got to have great user experience, and maybe that even goes ahead of virality. Because if we can make something that's useful to influencers and that has a great user experience for everyone that's using it, that should breed virality in and of itself. So that's just one example of a kind of discussion that you can have as your team. Again, take a few minutes. If you want to set a timer, feel free to add maybe 5 minutes to have a discussion here, just to speak through the strengths and weaknesses of each of these things and try to get a cohesive ranking of each of your stickies. Okay, so after a couple of minutes, you should start to have something that looks a little bit like this. So again, just for the purposes of understanding the desired output here, I'm just going to walk through what we came up with for the Travel Bucket app. So in this top section here, these first 4 cards, we see these as being absolutely critical. This is exactly what we need to have in the MVP. We want to have these things addressed. The next 3 here are kind of the nice to haves. And finally down here, we've got stuff to worry about in the future. So the things that we see are the most important and most critical. As I mentioned, it's usefulness for influencers. We believe then that if we get that usefulness for influencers, we'll have some virality because they'll be pushing it out towards their users or towards their followers. If we have a great user experience, that'll make their followers more likely to engage and to use it. And then finally, we need some utility for those users as well, because they're not going to stick around if the app is not useful to them, and influencers won't use the app if it's not going to be useful to their followers either. So we see those 4 as being very, very linked, and they are the key to our success. So this is what we want to really address in our MVP. The nice to have aspects would be the ability to show some last minute deals. That could be pretty nice. To have a nice user interface obviously is a plus as well. And that kind of goes hand in hand a bit with user experience, but interface tends to be a little bit more kind of around the colors and the branding and what the app looks like as opposed to how it works and what it feels like. So we don't see that as being quite as important. Finally, having some extra utility for users, that they're reminded of places when they're nearby. That's only relevant if you can get users and you can get influencers kind of building lists of places that people should try to visit. So again, this has to come first. We don't want to put the cart before the horse. So we need to get this part working first. Then we can add in some of these nice to haves. And finally, in future, as I said, we might have discussed that with users, we'll be able to monetize, we'll be able to get some profitability. And we might be a funded startup, so maybe profitability is not our goal right at the very beginning, although it's always nice to make a little bit of revenue because it helps prove your business model. That's a story for another day. And we might also think the scalability, so building a really scalable platform for the app. Again, it's not maybe that important, and we'll be able to build something very quickly that can accommodate, let's say, 1,000 users or 10,000 users or something without kind of hitting any performance issues around scalability. So again, there's no point in us for our MVP trying to build a system that's going to be extremely scalable and that could accommodate, 1 million users or 10 million users or 100 million users when we actually don't have any just yet. So that's a bit of a waste of time. That's something that we can tackle in the future. We'll cross that bridge when we come to it. So that is stack ranking your how might we's and your section titles. As I said, it's an optional exercise, but it is a useful one just to make sure everyone's aligned on, okay, we know exactly what is critical here, so this is what we're going to be focusing on. And if we can add in 1 or 2 of these, great, but let's make sure we get this right first. So everyone is aligned when we go into our solutionizing tomorrow. Great stuff. Once your team has a stack rank that looks a little bit like this, feel free to move on to the next video.